and I hope I'm live in YouTube. I'm gonna set up this to see if I am indeed live. Yes, there it is. Okay, awesome. Welcome everybody, welcome to Pencils and Stories. This is the place where you can learn about how to make your own comics. So if you want to make your own comics, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all so much for tuning in. If you are, I know it is a strange time for most of my audience to do a live, but I have other things to do today. So this was basically the only time I could do it, and I really wanted to do a live again. So if you're tuning in live, you can ask any questions about comics you want in the chat. You can also like ask specific questions about the length of your comic, like how, if you have any question about how to determine that, I am going to talk about it, but if you have any other questions that I'm not answering, then feel free to ask any other stuff in the chat as well. But today we're going to talk specifically about how to determine how long your comic should be. And let me just put on the live chat so I can monitor if there's anything coming in. Yes, I am live. That's awesome. There's one person watching. Cool. I'll just keep this up, keep this open just in case the chat here isn't working. Yeah, so making a comic, making a webcomic can sometimes feel like it's getting out of hand. I've definitely notice that as well with my stories. Like they tend to get really out of hand and really long. And is there any way to control how long your comic is going to be? The answer is yes, but you might need to make some hard decisions, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. This is also a lesson I'm teaching in my new upcoming course called How to Start Your Comic. So this is kind of like a little taste of what you could expect in the course. And I have like there's like a system that I came up with that I'm gonna teach you the gist of it in this video. And let's first talk about story a bit, because it is possible to tell most stories in lesser pages than you think. It just means that you need to change up your mindset a bit. For example, I am working on rewrites for Recollection City, my webcomic right now. And I just noticed that I have so many like nice scenes that I really want to get into depth about, but I also am aware that all of the little sidetracks and the nice to haves in my story will all add up to like a lot of pages. And in comics that escalates very quickly. Like what you think is a very small portion of your story can actually span over 20 pages, and then 20 pages times, you know, whatever time you work on your pages. For me, it's 15 to 20 hours per page at this moment. So you can calculate how much that is. That's like a lot of hours just for a little tiny side story. So when you want to keep the length of your comic in check, this is really where you dive into the story and actually really decide what is the most important stuff, what is essential for my audience to know. And that is when theme comes into play. And I've talked about theme on my channel. You can find videos about that. One in particular, and I will post it later in the description. But theme is one of the most important tools you can use to actually prune your story and get down to its core and actually really tell what your audience needs in terms of info, and tell the story that you want to tell without getting super sidetracked. That actually reminds me of this great story I once heard about the making of the Lord of the Rings, like the trilogy, the first 3 movies. There's a ton of info in the book. Like there's so much you could make like a whole, like they could have still made a movie every single year up until now, and we would still be going. That's how many side stories and stuff are in the book. And what they used to figure out what to leave out and what to add to the films was that what is the story mostly about? And it is about the journey of Frodo. And there's all kinds of stuff happening with all kinds of other people and other like like the races and everything in the book. But and then Frodo has a lot of extra adventures in the book that are not in the movie. They always came back to what is the story of Frodo and what is his journey and what is it that he is doing and what he needs to learn. So that was kind of like our compass of deciding what to leave out and what to add to the movies. And I actually think they did a pretty good job in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Hey, Magali is here. Hello. Oh, thanks so much. You're doing a great job, she said. Thank you. And thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it in between your meetings. So yeah, that's a quick thing about story. And then when it comes to your comic, when you first start, I think it's wise to decide on a few things beforehand, before you start. Because if you're in the middle of a story, it's very hard, especially if you set certain things up that you want to get to. Eventually, it's very hard to kill your darlings, as they say, like chop it out of the story, chop certain storylines out of the story, certain characters, maybe even certain events. And the best thing to handle that is before you start your comic, and then realizing that even if you have the most lean story, you will always come up with nice things about visual storytelling and nice ways to kind of introduce something that will just lengthen your comic. Like, yeah. You will always end up with more pages than you think. I think that's kind of normal. So yeah, make the story as lean as possible at the beginning if you really want to have like a condensed story and a shorter story than otherwise you would do if you would just use everything that drops into your head, like everything that you want to do, because that can become a very long comic. Which there's nothing wrong with a long comic. Let me just say, if you are a person who likes to be in one world and with a certain cast of characters for a really long time, and I'm one of those people actually. I get new ideas, but I also get super enthusiastic about my current ideas. And especially when I'm super into it, then, I just can draw them all the time. There is nothing wrong with that. So if you want to do a super long story, you totally can. I do advise, if you're super new to comics, I do advise you to start a little smaller at first. Make some short comics, and they don't have to be super long, like 40 pages. They can be just 1 page, 2 page. Like, get a feeling for the process and make sure that you actually know that you want to do comics and get a little bit of a feel of how to make them before you dive into the bigger one. But I've seen people jump into a giant story right at the beginning, like immediately, and it works for some. And some people, they figure out after a certain amount of pages that they want to move on to other stories, and they quit their comic and do another one. That happens too. That's obviously always a danger with a longer comic. But yeah, if you're one of those people, and I am a person who can stay within one story for a long time, then a longer comic is definitely not bad. But if you want to, if you have other priorities, like you want to get to another story, or you want to experiment with many different styles, then you might actually want to put a cap on the amount of pages you make, for example, or the amount of time that you're working on your comic. So yeah, the system I teach in my course, How to Start Your Comic, is to look at what's most important to you. And I've decided there's 3 things that you need to look at. First of all is if you actually have a certain set amount of pages in your head. So let's say you want to do a 24-page comic, or you're making a comic for an anthology and it needs to be a certain amount of pages. Then you already have you have a parameter. Like, that's your comic. That's the story you come up with needs to be told in those amount of pages. I actually think that most stories can be told in a certain amount of pages if you want to. You might need to get really smart about your storytelling and about your setup and the amount of information you give through visuals or in the intro. And even a 1-page comic is, it all is built up in like a setup, and then you introduce kind of like a problem, and you have a main character. The main character is overcoming some kind of obstacle somewhere, and in the end there's a change of sorts, and that even applies to a one-page comic, and of course to all the other sizes as well. So technically, I did this experiment once. Technically, I can tell the story of Recollection City in one page. It's ridiculous and it makes absolutely no sense at all, but it can be done. So if you have an idea for a story in mind and you have a certain amount of pages, you could definitely make sure that you tell the story in those amounts of pages. But you might need to get really creative if you have a very big idea and you only have a certain amount of pages. You need to be smart about immediately introducing the character really well, introducing the emotional struggles and obstacles really well, and come to a very quick resolve. But that definitely can be done. It's a very special skill, but it can be developed. So what you could basically do is, for every single page, for example, you have the 24 page. I keep going to 24 because this is actually what I did for 24-hour comic day. The comic needs to be 24 pages. You need to make it in 24 hours. What I did was I had a line for every single page on a piece of paper. I numbered it 1 to 24, and on every single line I said what happened, and I made sure that I had a beginning, middle, and ending, and that I ended the comic in 24 pages. So that is something that that you can use, break up the story in lines, and then have literally write out the pages, what info you want to give on the page. I use story structure for that as well. There's many different story structures. For example, the Hero's Journey is a very well-known one. I personally use the beat sheet from Blake Snyder. That's made famous in his book Save the Cat. For me, that's a very natural story structure. I like the Hero's Journey don't necessarily fits how I think about stories, so there's many different ways to go about it. There's way more story structures out there, and you can use that to actually divide the pages into sections of story, in the structure itself. Some people would say the first 25% is the first act and the setup, and then 50% is the middle and the second act, and then 25% again is the third act and the last act. And you can kind of divide the story in your head that way. So that is when you have a very set amount of pages. That is one way you can go about it. If that's very important to you, then you have the time. You have the length, and you have a time aspect to it. With time, I mean, if you want to be done in a certain amount of time. For example, you set yourself the goal to do a comic in 6 months. The next 6 months is going to be you are going to make a comic. If that is very important to you, you actually need to figure out what you want to do with the comic. Is there a certain kind of comic you want to do? Is there a certain kind of style? Or do you want to make a certain amount of pages? And those two things have a different kind of approach to it. If you decide I want to make a comic in 6 months and I actually have a fixed length, then you can kind of figure out, if you know how much time you have a week for the comic, you can calculate in how many hours you need to be able to make one page to make it in 6 months. That's a little technical, but for example, let's say you want to do a 10-page comic in 6 months and you only have a few hours per week to work on it. I'm making this up as I go, and I'm very bad at calculus. But 10 pages in 6 months, this is already breaking my brain. But you can kind of figure out, if you have 2 hours a week and you have 6 months to do it times 2 hours, then you know how much time you have for those 10 pages. And then you can find a style that you are able to make the comic in those 2 hours a week, and you will be done in 6 months. So that is the thing if you want to have a very limited, it might be nice to have this point on the horizon and knowing that in 6 months you're done, and you can, build up suspense to that moment online and tease to your audience that you have a comic coming up, and in 6 months it's going to be here, and you share some behind the scenes, and you building up a comic launch can be really fun online, and then you also can come up with some more ideas and know that in 6 months you will be able to work on your next idea. So that's a very good point as well. And then the third point, we have the length, we have the time, and then the third point is the style. If you have a very non-negotiable style that you want to do, for example, you want to make a comic with paint, watercolor, or you want to do a black and white comic and stuff, and the style is very important to you, then that might mean that your comic is going to be time intensive, and if you don't have too much time in a week, it might mean that you're actually working for a longer time on your comic. But if the style is more important to you than being done in a certain time, then that's definitely something to consider. It can mean it can also mean that you decide to have a very short comic and do it in that style. And then you can do style tests and see how long it takes you to do one page, and then do those style tests, and then you will know, like, for example, for me, I do 15 to 20 hours per page, so that's the style that I'm working in right now. And you might actually say, like, well, I'm gonna make this comic in 10 pages, or you can say I want to be done in those 6 months. And then you can, again, calculate, like, what is more important, like the length, or that you want to be done in a certain amount of time, or, you want a very big comic and you have that certain style, and then it's going to take you years. Which is fine if you choose to do that. I do that. That's actually what I chose. I chose a certain style, and I chose a certain length for my story. I chose a longer story. So that means that I'm going to work at it for years. So the thing I'm sacrificing in those three things is time, because usually when you have the choice of three things, like how long your comic is going to be, how much time you're going to spend on it, and what the style is going to be. As per usual, when you have an option of three, there's usually only two things you can actually have, and one thing needs to be kind of sacrificed. It's the same with freelance work. How does that one go again? It's like I can be fast, I can be cheap, and I can be good. You can have two, but not three. I cannot do something fast and cheap and then have it be really good. And I cannot be really good and very fast for a really cheap price. Like that kind of stuff. And it's slightly the same here. If you choose time as your most important thing, like you want to be done in a certain amount of time, you might need to sacrifice length or style. If you want to do a certain kind of style and you have a certain kind of length in mind for your comic, you have to sacrifice time. You're going to work on it for a long time. So it kind of works like that. This is actually something that I teach in my course. If you want to, dive very deep into all of these decisions that you need to be making about making comics, and about, how to actually start well, and knowing what to prepare, because I see a lot of comic artists not really knowing when they're ready to start making their pages, and they get stuck in world building or character development and stuff. And that's why I designed my course, because I wanted to take all of that guesswork out. I've made quite a few comics in my life, and actually now I'm working on the long comic that a lot of people want to work towards. So that's how I actually set up my course. You can use it for smaller comics, but you can use it for your long comic as well. And I will lay out the steps you need to figure out beforehand, because some things are just better to know before you start. And one of those things, for example, is story. How to outline your story well. What to design, what you can leave for later to design. So all of that stuff. And if you're interested in my course and you want to know more about it, I am launching it on Kickstarter. So if you want to be notified when it launches, you can go to howtostartacomic.com, and you can actually put yourself on a notification list, and I will keep you up to date to the process and the launch. And you will be the first to know when the comic launches on Kickstarter. And on that note, if you want to have a little taste of kind of like how my course is set up, I have made, I should call it a summary, I guess, like a little summary of my course, and I made a checklist, just a very simple checklist that you can follow if you want to start your comic. And that's the ultimate checklist to start your comic, and you get it if you sign up for my email list. So if you do that, I'll send you an email with some extra information on how to make comics every single week, and then you will get a checklist and you can start on your comic today if you want to. And for that, you can go to pencilsandstories.com/extra. So this video is a little taste of that. I see there's some questions in the comic that I can answer. Let me see. There's one question from Magali, and there's Millie Comics. Thank you for the tips. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for watching. That's awesome. Magali says, did you start with smaller comics yourself, or did you jump on Recollection City right away? If so, where can we see your previous work? Yeah, I did a lot of comics before. I didn't finish all of them. I have a few that I finished. I think the biggest one was just a penciled comic, and that was 40 pages. That one I actually finished, and then I made a lot of short comics for stuff like student magazines, and you know, I had this comic going when I was still in interpreting school about a few hearing and deaf students living together in a student house, and that was kind of like an ongoing adventure, and it was like a 1 or 2 page comic every single, I think it was a monthly magazine that we brought out into, that we put out in the school. So the interpreting and teacher students, like sign language students, could read that. So that was a lot of fun, but also like other student magazines and you know, little one-shot comics. I started a lot of comics. Like I started one with my sister. Shout out to my sister. I've shown you that before in another video that I did, and then I started a longer comic before Recollection City, and that was supposed to be a longer comic, but I got really stuck with the story. I started making pages before the story was actually finished, but I was super, like, I needed to learn a lot more about writing at that point. That was quite a few years ago now. But that one actually, I got super stuck. So eventually it was very beneficial for me to let that idea go and start. And that's when I got the idea for Recollection City and started on that. And it was super freeing to finally be able to work on a new, fresh story. And I could actually, you know, I had learned so much about writing, and you know, I could work on that one. So so yeah, I did make a longer one before Recollection City, but I did not get super far. That was supposed to be a longer one. So I did mostly like shorter comics. Recollection City is like, I've never gotten this far. Like Recollection City now is almost 100 pages at the moment. Yeah, and I'm doing some rewriting for it, but also I'm super busy, like building a business, like doing videos and work on my course and stuff. So Recollection City unfortunately is on hiatus, but I definitely want to start it up again soon. I miss it so much. So yeah, comics is intensive, and that's why having that idea beforehand, like knowing what you're going to do if you're going to make a small comic, if you're going to make it really long, is very good to know before it runs away with you. Yeah, so I definitely just recommend, if you want to not let it run away with you, to actually set a number and line those, number those lines, page, just plan it out, have the story solid, and plan out your pages before you actually put a pencil to the page. 40 pages isn't small. I agree. It took me a while. Killed my baby. Yes, I did. I didn't officially say goodbye to that comic for a long while. I actually did that like two years ago. I had like this moment where I was like actively deciding I've got it shelved, but I'm actually gonna put it off the shelf, and I'm literally gonna archive it, and I'll never work on it again. Yeah. That was nice. So I have all kinds of new ideas anyway, so I probably wouldn't get back to that one, but you can still see some stuff from that on my DeviantArt, I think. I left some of my old art on DeviantArt because I was like, I always like seeing where people started and where they came from. So I actually don't know what my DeviantArt username is at the moment because I changed it, but it still might be, I think it is Henrike D, because Henrike was already taken. So I think it's my name with a D from my last name, or it's my entire name. I'm actually not sure, and I think I changed the name to Pencils and Stories on there like a few years ago, but I still might have the old URL. I'm not sure. You have to Google it. I don't have any links anywhere, but yeah. That's a place where you can see my old stuff, and I think I have some stuff left from my old comic on there. So Nathan joined the chat. Nathan Skiffington. I do love that name. Do you do your writing and art by yourself? Yes, I do. I actually love writing and drawing. Yeah, some people don't, and then collaborations might be a good idea. I actually had a collaboration going with somebody, and I did the writing part, and she did the art, but she got hired by studios and stuff, so she had a lot of work to do, so she wasn't able to work on the story. But yeah, that's something you can do, like befriend people in the art community and try to make a story together. That's super fun. But I do love writing and drawing. I was a writer. I always say I was a writer before I was an artist, but I actually did not hone my writing skill for a long time because I was super focused on art. So only in the last years I've really seriously dove into story and story structure again, but I love that stuff so much. Like what I do when I'm sitting in a bus or something, I'm always like analyzing some movie in my head. Like I love that stuff. And then obviously I love drawing and coming up with my own characters, so yeah, I chose to do it both. But there's definitely some hugely successful collaborations going on online. There's also like websites where you can find people to collaborate with. That's usually paid. So if you're the writer, you usually pay an artist to make pages for you. So it might be good to do short stories then as well, or work with some multiple artists. Yeah. So Magali's, I'll go. I also still have DeviantArt. Yes. And Nathan adds, I like the connection that doing your own art gives you to your story and characters. Yes, definitely. Me too. Like you can blend everything together, and when you're writing, you can actually, you know exactly what you wanted to say with a certain scene and stuff, and you can really tie it together with the visual storytelling element and try to really translate your writing into the artwork just with your vision. Like I do love that a lot. If you're working with an artist, then your script writing needs to be clear, or you leave a lot of room for the artist to experiment with the visual storytelling element and bring a little bit of their own vision into it. It can be fun as well. But yeah, I like that too. Awesome. I guess that was it, guys. It was not an hour long or something. Unless you do have some more questions for me, then definitely. Yeah, this chat is the same. Good. I'm not missing anything. That's awesome. Yeah, if you have any questions, drop them now. I'll wait for a little while longer. I already want to thank you all for watching. If you have any questions about figuring out the length, if you have any follow-up questions, maybe I can do follow-up videos. That could be fun. So leave your questions below in the comments. Yeah, leave a comment. In general, what do you think about the channel, and how, any other questions that you might have about comics. Doesn't have to be related to this, like other ideas for videos that you want to see more about are always welcome in the comments. I want to thank you all for leaving comments. They've been super helpful. And yeah, like this video if you liked it. It also helps in the algorithms of YouTube. Seen a slight increase in subscribers lately, so welcome if you're new. I'm very happy to have you, and I hope to provide you with more info about making comics. As a quick reminder, you can get the checklist to start making your own comic today. That is at pencilsandstories.com/extra, and you will immediately receive it in your inbox. Don't forget to confirm your subscription. I'm seeing some people come in and then they don't confirm their subscription, and I'm not allowed to email you if you don't do that, because I need to have all kinds of proof that you're giving me permission to use your email address. So please confirm your subscription. Check your spam folder if you don't immediately get a confirmation email. I'm just a little sad to see the list of people who are who have a confirmation email lying around somewhere and they haven't confirmed. Obviously, it's totally okay if you changed your mind. you didn't want to get on my email list anyway. You can also always subscribe, but I really hope that the content is helpful. I send a weekly email about making comics with extra tips about, things like time management and the steps on the checklist. So, and I'll send you updates about what I'm doing. And speaking of updates, if you want to get notified when my course launches, How to Start a Comic, I'm launching it on Kickstarter. It will have a special early bird pilot price. It will never be that cheap again. So definitely get yourself on that notification list so you don't miss the launch. That's at howtostartacomic.com. I think I promoted enough for now. Thanks all for watching. I'm surprised that there were still some people showing up because it's such a weird time, but you all might be in Europe, maybe? I don't know. It was very early for the Americans, but there might be other continents that for who it was a better time. So thank you all for tuning in live. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking and engaging. It all helps me so much. And I want to wish you a very great day. Go and make some comics. Bye, guys.